The ringing of the phone made me break away from sweeping the path in the east corner of Santa Ana Park. My broom was almost done dancing with the fall leaves anyway. 6 in the morning is the most peaceful time of day. Only a few early joggers crossed the park, greeting me with nods. They were used to seeing Janitor Ermley in the same spot every morning. I took my time pulling my cell phone from the pocket of my uniform overalls. No one calls this early without a good reason. The screen showed Noah. My son rarely thought of me before noon. "Good morning, Noah," I said, leaning against the trunk of an old oak tree. "Dad, are you working already?" I could hear the slight irritation in his voice. It was a tone he'd adopted since marrying Hazel 2 years ago. "It's been 4 hours," I answered, glancing at my watch. "The park isn't going to clean itself?" The heavy sigh on the other end made me smile. There was no way Noah could accept my choice. How could the former owner of the Shiny Wheels car wash chain volunteer to be a janitor? It was beyond him, and certainly beyond his wife. "Dad, we have news." His voice suddenly took on a solemn tone. "Hazel closed her first really big deal. Sold that mansion in the hills, remember? She told me about it at Christmas." "Sure," I lied. All I heard at Christmas was Hazel's endless monologues about how hard it was to start a real estate career at a prestigious agency and how she was underestimated by her peers. "We want to celebrate at La Casita Dorada this Friday night. You should come. It's important to us." La Casita Dorada is one of the most expensive restaurants in Santa Ana. I could guess whose idea it was. "Friday night, I've been thinking. I don't have evening shifts, so I can make it." "What time?" 7 o'clock. And, Dad." Noah hesitated. "Maybe you could wear that gray suit I gave you for your birthday. The one that's still hanging in the closet with the tag on it." I felt the corners of my lips drop. Surely Hazel wouldn't want her father-in-law to show up at an expensive restaurant in shabby janitor's clothes. What would her new co-workers think if they found out? "We'll see," I said evasively. Dash say hi to Hazel. "I will, Dad. See you Friday." I tucked the phone into my pocket and took up the broom again. The sun had already risen above the trees, warming the October air. There was still a lot of work ahead. Following the same route for the past 3 years, I methodically cleaned the park's paths, emptied the trash cans, and checked the benches for damage. 47 benches. I knew each one like an old friend. By 8 o'clock, Mrs. Wendell showed up with her poodle, Frank. She had been walking him at the same time every day for the last 5 years, as far back as I could remember. "Good morning, Ermel." She greeted me as I swept by the fountain. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" "Good morning, Audrey." I nodded back. Frank looks especially elegant today. The poodle with the new haircut walked proudly on a leash. "Yes, we went to the groomer yesterday. Cost a fortune. But isn't he handsome?" She leaned over, stroking the dog. "How are you doing? Did your son call?" Audrey was one of the few people I sometimes shared details of my personal life with. Just now. He's inviting me to dinner Friday night. His wife made some big deal." "Oh, the sister-in-law who wrinkles her nose every time she sees your janitor's uniform?" Audrey was never shy about being blunt. "I don't understand people like that. Honest work deserves respect." "Not everyone understands that," I shrugged. After Audrey left, I continued my rounds. At 10, I took a break and sat down on my favorite bench, number 23, overlooking the pond. Taking a thermos of coffee and a sandwich out of my bag, I enjoyed the silence. From an inside pocket, I pulled out a small, shabby photograph. Elizabeth was looking at me from a picture taken a year before she died. Her eyes still glowed with the same warmth they had the day we first met 45 years ago. Sometimes I thought I could still hear her laughing somewhere nearby. "You should see Hazel, Liz," I said quietly, looking at the picture. "I think you would have found the right words to melt that ice. You were always good at it." Elizabeth died 5 years ago of cancer. Noah was in grad school at the time, immersed in mathematical theories. He took his mother's death hard, but quickly returned to his studies, as if he was afraid to stop and realize what had happened. A year after her death, I sold the business, a chain of 12 car washes that Elizabeth and I had been building for over 30 years. The offer was too good to refuse. $8 million plus a percentage of future earnings. Money I could never spend for the rest of my life, especially considering the house was long paid off and basic needs were more than modest. I remembered informing Noah of the sale. He was amazed at the amount and asked what I was going to do with all that money. Live simply, I replied at the time. He thought I was joking. When I got a job as a janitor at a city park 3 months later, Noah was horrified. He had just started dating Hazel, an ambitious economics graduate who was planning a career in luxury real estate. I remember him saying, "Dad, you can't be a janitor." What am I going to tell Hazel? That my millionaire father volunteers to pick up other people's trash? That's when I first felt like I was losing my son. Not because of distance or busyness, because of the values he had begun to embrace. Values his mother would never have approved of. I tucked the photograph back into my inside pocket, right over my heart, as Elizabeth liked to say. Finishing my coffee, I collected the thermos and the empty sandwich wrapper. It was time to get back to work. When I reached the playground, I noticed Tommy, a 7-year-old boy who often came to the park with his babysitter. He was sitting on a swing, dangling his feet in the air. "Hi, Mr. Ermel," he shouted when he spotted me. "Look what I got." He proudly displayed a small model of a sports car. "Impressive." I stepped closer to get a closer look. "A Porsche Cayenne?" "Yes." "How did you know that?" His eyes widened in surprise. I grinned. I used to be good with cars. I even had a similar one. "A real one?" Tommy jumped up and down on the swing. "A real one," I nodded. "Black, with a leather interior. Where is it now?" "It's in the garage, waiting for a special occasion to drive it out." Tommy's nanny, sitting nearby with the phone, didn't even look up. She, like most people, didn't take the elderly janitor's words about the expensive car seriously. "I'd like to see it someday," Tommy said dreamily. "Maybe someday you will," I winked at him. "How are you doing in math? Still struggling with the multiplication table?" We talked for a few more minutes before I continued my rounds. Tommy was one of the few people who saw me as someone with a story, not just a janitor. Kids are usually better than adults at that. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my shift was over. I changed in the back room into my usual jeans and shirt, turned in my inventory, and went out the service entrance. My old Chevy was waiting in the staff parking lot. The car was almost 20 years old, but it handled the daily commute from home to work and back. I lived in a small one-story house about 10 minutes from the park, the house where Elizabeth and I had raised Noah. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, 2-car garage. Just an ordinary house in an ordinary neighborhood. Parking the Chevy in the driveway, I left the garage closed. Inside was the same Porsche Cayenne, a gift to myself for my 65th birthday. I rarely used it, preferring an inconspicuous Chevy for everyday errands. Upon entering the house, the first thing I did was check the mail. Among the bills and sales brochures was an envelope from an investment company, a quarterly report on the state of my portfolio. After a glimpse of the numbers, I nodded in satisfaction. Even with a conservative approach to investing, the returns were more than decent. After a quick snack, I decided to call my financial advisor, Phil. He answered after the second ringtone. "Ermley, I was just about to call you. Did you see the report?" "I just got it. Looks good." "Looks good?" Phil laughed. This is the best quarter in 2 years. Your tech stocks are up 20%, not to mention real estate." "I noticed," I replied dryly. "What about that charitable foundation you were talking about?" "It's all set to go live. All I need is your signature on the paperwork." "When can you come by the office?" "Maybe next week. I'm having a family dinner on Friday." "Oh," Phil sounded curious. "With your son and that? What's her name?" "Hazel." "Yeah, they're inviting me to the restaurant. Her first big deal as a realtor." "And you're going to go as a janitor or a millionaire?" I could hear the chuckle in Phil's voice. He was one of the few people who knew about my strange double lifestyle. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. "I'll see what I'm in the mood for." After talking to Phil, I spent the rest of the day doing chores and reading a new book on astronomy, a hobby I'd discovered after retirement. In the evening, I cooked a simple dinner and after eating, sat in a chair with an album of family photos. Noah looked at me from dozens of pictures, a newborn in the arms of a happy Elizabeth, a toddler taking his first steps, a high school student with a math Olympiad diploma, a university graduate. His eyes, so similar to his mother's, always shone with intelligence and curiosity. When I got to the wedding photos, the expression on my face changed. Hazel looked flawless. Perfect dress, perfect hair, perfect smile. But something in her eyes always alerted me. Cold calculation? Maybe. Elizabeth would call it eyes without laughter. The wedding was lavish and expensive, as much as a young math teacher and an aspiring realtor could afford. I offered to help, but Noah declined, saying they could manage on their own. "We don't want to start a family life with other people's money," he said at the time. I respected his decision, even though I knew Hazel was behind those words. As I closed the album, I thought about the upcoming dinner. Part of me wanted to put on my old work clothes and watch Hazel apologize to her co-workers for the unsightly father-in-law. The other part realized it would embarrass Noah. My phone rang again. Noah's number popped up on the screen. "Dad, sorry for the late call." He began without a greeting. "Hazel wanted to make it clear that you were coming to dinner alone." The question caught me off guard. "Who would I bring?" I inquired. "Elizabeth hasn't been with us for 5 years." "No, that's not what I meant," Noah answered quickly, clearly embarrassed. "It's just that Hazel's organizing the seating arrangements, and she needs to know the exact number of guests." "Tell her the old janitor's coming alone," I said sarcastically. Dad. Noah sounded tired. "I'm sorry, son. Yeah, I'll be alone." "Thank you. And Dad, really, put on that gray suit, okay? It's important to Hazel." After we said goodbye, I sat in the silence of the living room for a long time. The call from my son only reinforced my decision. I wouldn't be adjusting to my daughter-in-law's expectations on Friday. It was time for a little lesson. I pulled out my phone and texted Phil. "Decided. I'm going as a janitor, but I'll bring something interesting with me." A minute later, I got a reply. "I'd love to see their faces." "Good luck, old fox." Smiling, I headed off to bed. Friday promised to be interesting. Friday morning was colder than usual. October is rarely really cold in Santa Ana, but today the temperature was barely 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I finished my shift an hour early, having excused myself from my supervisor under the pretense of a family dinner. Bud, my supervisor, just hummed and waved his hand. He knew I usually overworked and never took time off. "Family dinner, huh?" he queried as I handed over the inventory. "You have a son living in Santa Ana, right?" "Yeah, son and daughter-in-law," I nodded. "She's having some success at work, so we're celebrating." "That's a good thing." Bud scratched his graying beard. "Give them old Bud's regards. Tell them Santa Ana Parks is in good hands." I grinned, imagining Hazel's reaction to such words. She'd squirm as if she'd swallowed a lemon. Back home, I threw my work clothes into the washing machine and took a shower. Standing under the hot jets of water, I contemplated the evening ahead. The clock read 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had plenty of time to get ready for dinner at 7. After my shower, I brewed some strong tea and sat in a chair by the living room window. From here, I had a view of the small but manicured garden, Elizabeth's last project before her illness. I kept it in the same condition as it had been when she was alive. Sometimes I thought she still tended those plants through me. My thoughts returned to Hazel. Our first meeting was about 3 years ago when Noah brought her to Sunday lunch. I remember her appraising gaze sliding over the modest furnishings of the house. I still owned car washes then, but I lived in the same house where Noah grew up. Hazel was polite but aloof. She actively kept the conversation going, asking questions about my business, finding out details. I felt she was not evaluating me as a person, but my status and capabilities. "Car washes are so interesting," she said at the time, though her eyes said otherwise. "It must be a lucrative business?" "Enough to ensure a comfortable life," I answered evasively. "Dad's being modest," Noah interjected. "He has 12 locations all over Santa Ana." Hazel's eyes widened for a moment, and then she gave me a new, warmer smile. This change was all too obvious. Elizabeth would have said I should have been wary at this point, and she would have been right. After that meeting, I had lunch with the young couple several times. Hazel was always impeccably polite, but there was never a real connection between us. When Noah left the room, the conversation would falter. One day I noticed her looking at a picture of our family on the mantelpiece. "You look a lot like your mom," she said to Noah when he returned. The same eyes. I remained silent. Noah was a carbon copy of Elizabeth, the same penetrating gaze, the same soft features. But now, looking at him next to Hazel, I could see that softness fading away, replaced by something harder and more insecure at the same time. When I announced that I'd sold the business, Hazel tried to hide her disappointment behind congratulations. Noah mentioned the amount of the deal, and a faint smile appeared on her face. She immediately started talking about what a great investment opportunity there is right now, especially in real estate. My real estate economics professor said that now is the perfect time to buy luxury properties, she said casually, especially in coastal areas. Maybe, I replied, but I'm thinking of another use for that money. She looked at me expectantly, but I didn't pursue the subject. The real shock came when, 3 months after I sold the business, I got a job as a janitor in a city park. Noah had told Hazel about it over the phone when I was visiting them. I could hear the change in her voice. Was he kidding? Her whisper was loud enough for me to hear from the next room. No, Noah answered. He says he needs physical activity and socializing with people. But a janitor? Really? With his money? That sentence explained a lot. It wasn't just about prestige or social status. It was about money. Hazel expected a wealthy father-in-law to lead an appropriate lifestyle, an upscale neighborhood, expensive cars, membership in a country club, anything that would emphasize her new status as well. After I started working as a janitor, our relationship became even more strained. Hazel avoided seeing me, especially in public places. At family dinners, she kept aloof, often checking her phone and referring to urgent work matters. Once at Thanksgiving last year, Noah invited a couple of his co-workers from college. Hazel introduced me as Noah's dad, carefully avoiding any mention of my work. When one of the guests asked what I did, she quickly interjected, "Ermel is on a well-deserved vacation. He used to own his own business. Now I'm a janitor at the city park," I added with a smile. There was an awkward pause. Hazel's face stiffened and her eyes flashed lightning bolts in my direction. "Daddy likes to joke," Noah said with a strained smile, trying to lighten the mood. "He helps keep the park clean sometimes. Volunteering, you know." I didn't bother to correct him, though I noticed Hazel exhale in relief. After dinner, when the guests left, she didn't say a word to me, and the next morning I happened to overhear them talking in the kitchen. "Why did you do that?" Hazel hissed. "You know how important faculty connections are. Professor Golding can help with my recommendation to the agency." "It's just a job, Hazel," Noah replied tiredly. "Dad's worked hard all his life, and if now he wants to. If your father wants to pretend to be a poor janitor, let him do it away from my professional contacts." She cut him off. God, this is so humiliating. I quietly left the house without waiting for breakfast. On the way home, I reflected on how my son had changed. Noah had always been a sensitive and thoughtful child. Elizabeth said he had the soul of a poet in the body of a mathematician. He saw beauty in numbers and equations, but he also had a rare empathy. Right now, that empathy seemed to be directed solely at Hazel. He was torn between respecting me and wanting to please his wife. Each time I saw the scales tipping toward her, sighing heavily, I set the empty cup aside and glanced at the clock. It was almost 4. It was time to decide what to wear for dinner. I went up to the bedroom and opened the closet. The gray suit Noah had given me hung on the edge, still in the protective film from the dry cleaner. Expensive fabric, impeccable fit. Hazel had obviously helped with the selection. My work clothes were hanging nearby. Worn overalls, plain shirts, worn jeans. I ran my hand over the suit. To wear it was to obey Hazel's rules, to show that I accepted her value system, where appearance and status were more important than character and actions. Elizabeth wouldn't approve of such a compromise. My hand moved to the green work overalls with the Santa Ana Parks patch on the breast pocket, clean but tattered from frequent washing. It made me feel like myself, a man who found fulfillment in simple, honest work. The decision came naturally. I pulled out the overalls and hung them on the chair by the bed. Then I walked over to the dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer. Under a stack of sweaters was a small velvet box. When I opened it, I smiled at the sight of the keys with the Porsche crest on them. At that moment, the phone rang. Noah's name popped up on the screen. "Dad, did you remember dinner?" His son's voice sounded tense. "Of course not," I answered calmly. "I'll be at the restaurant at 7. "Great," he exhaled with obvious relief. "Hazel made a reservation for 6 people. Her boss and the couple she sold that mansion to will be there." Serious company, I remarked. So, yeah, it's very important to her career. Noah sounded proud, mixed with concern. Dad, about the suit. Don't worry, I interrupted. I'll look nice. Thank you. He thanked me sincerely. It means a lot to us. For Hazel. After the call, I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the overalls and the keys to the Porsche. Noah had always been a good son. Even now, under Hazel's influence, he was trying to keep us connected. Maybe I should have worn the suit for his sake, to avoid embarrassing him in front of important guests. I remembered his words. It means a lot to us. For Hazel. For Hazel, not to us. My son increasingly spoke in her words, her intonation. The memory of a recent Christmas only reinforced my decision. Then Hazel organized a holiday dinner at their house. I brought modest gifts, a book on the history of math for Noah, and a scarf for Hazel. She barely glanced at the gift, thanking me carelessly and putting it aside. Later, I noticed the scarf in the trash can in the kitchen, where I'd gone to help with the dishes. Their gift to me was that same gray suit. So you can look appropriate when we invite you to decent places? Hazel explained with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I thanked them, though everything squeezed inside. It wasn't a gift, but a message. Your current clothes make us uncomfortable. Noah looked guilty, but remained silent. Another incident happened last summer. Noah had invited me to a barbecue at their new house, modest but in an upscale neighborhood, clearly at the limit of their finances. The guests were mostly Hazel's colleagues from the real estate agency. What does your father do? One of the women asked Noah as I stepped away from the grill. He's retired, Hazel replied quickly. He used to own his own business. Oh, how interesting. What kind of business? The woman persisted. I saw Hazel tense up. Noah swallowed nervously. Car washes, he finally answered. And now he's into gardening, Hazel added with a strained smile. Ermlo, why don't you tell Jennifer about your roses? I never had roses in my garden. Elizabeth preferred lavender and jasmine. But I played along, giving some general information about growing roses, gleaned from gardening magazines my wife read. Later, as I was helping clear the table, I overheard Hazel saying to someone on the phone, It went great, but my father-in-law was as inappropriate as ever. Thank God he didn't mention his job as a janitor. I didn't say anything. Maybe you should have. I looked at the clock, almost 5. I had to get ready. A decision had finally matured in my head. Tonight I would not adjust to Hazel's expectations. I wouldn't pretend to be someone else for her comfort. I put on a clean white shirt, dark blue jeans, and topped it off with the same green work overalls. Shined my old but sturdy work boots. Looking at myself in the mirror, I nodded at my own reflection. This was what Ermel Pixton the janitor looked like, and I saw no shame in it. I put the keys to the Porsche in my overalls pocket. A little surprise for tonight. As I passed the mantelpiece, I stopped at Elizabeth's picture. It's going to be an interesting evening tonight, dear, I said quietly. I hope you would approve. It seemed to me that she was smiling a little wider than usual. I walked out of the house and headed for the garage. The door lifted with a quiet hum of the electric drive, revealing a black Porsche Cayenne, gleaming in the setting sun. I hadn't driven it in months, but thanks to regular maintenance, it was in perfect condition. As I sat behind the wheel, I ran my hand over the leather upholstery and inserted the key into the ignition. The engine responded with a soft, confident growl. For a second, I hesitated. Maybe I was going too far with this little experiment, but then I remembered Hazel's dismissive tone when she talked about my work, her fake smiles, and all my doubts dissipated. It was time for a little lesson. I pulled the Porsche onto the road and headed toward the restaurant, enjoying the smooth ride of the car and anticipating the evening ahead. On the way, I turned on the radio. One of Elizabeth's favorite songs was playing. A good sign. La Casita Dorada was in the most upscale part of Santa Ana. I purposely arrived 15 minutes ahead of schedule so I could park the Porsche in a prominent spot out front. The thought of Hazel seeing her janitor father-in-law getting out of the luxury car made me smile. As I parked, I took another look at my reflection in the rearview mirror. A janitor in work overalls. That's how Hazel had seen me all this time. It was the image that made her so embarrassed. Well, it was time to show the other side of the coin. I got out of the car and handed the keys to the parking attendant, Noticing his surprised look, the green jumpsuit with the City Park logo didn't match the luxury car. I wonder what Hazel will think when she sees me like this, I thought as I walked up the steps to the restaurant entrance. My stomach twisted unpleasantly with nervous anticipation, but I resolutely opened the door and stepped inside. The golden walls of La Casita Dorada lived up to the restaurant's name. The subdued light from the crystal chandeliers reflected in the gilded decor, creating the feeling of a warm, sunny day even in the evening hours. The maitre d' behind the counter, a middle-aged man with an impeccably trimmed mustache, looked me over with an appraising gaze, lingering on my green overalls. His professional smile wavered slightly. "What can I do for you, sir?" he asked in the tone of voice one might use to ask a random stray. "I have a reservation," I said calmly. "Dash A table for 6 under the name of Pixton or Brooks Pixton." The maitre d' checked his clipboard, and his eyebrows raised slightly. "Oh yes, the table for Mrs. Brooks Pixton's company," he said in a different, subservient tone. "You are the first of the guests. Let me show you out." We passed through the main hall where people in expensive suits and evening gowns sat at tables. Some of them threw perplexed glances at me. The maitre d' took me to a spacious table in the corner of the room, partially separated from the others by a decorative partition, one of the best seats in the restaurant. "Would you like something to drink while waiting for the other guests, sir?" the maitre d' asked. "Scotch, single malt," I replied. "If there's a Glenfiddich, it's an 18-year-old. A shadow of surprise ran across his face. Clearly not what he expected to hear from a man in work overalls. "Of course, sir. It'll be right out." Left alone, I leaned back in my chair and watched the other customers. Most of them were about my age, but they looked very different. Impeccable hair, expensive clothes, jewelry. A waiter came over and placed a heavy glass of amber liquid in front of me. "Glenfiddich, 18 years old, sir." I took a sip, savoring the rich flavor of good whiskey. At exactly 7, I noticed Noah and Hazel enter the hall, accompanied by an elderly couple and a personable middle-aged man. Noah wore a navy blue suit that I'd only seen him wear a couple of times. Hazel was resplendent in a tight black dress with an open back and a pearl necklace. Too flashy for her age and for a dinner like this. The maitre d' pointed in my direction, and I saw Hazel's face change when she noticed my green jumpsuit. First disbelief, then shock, followed by poorly concealed anger. She said something quickly to Noah, whose face immediately took on a panicked expression. As they approached the table, I stood up and smiled as naturally as possible. "Good evening," I greeted when they got close enough. "I hope I'm not too early." "Dad," Noah tried to smile, but it came out strained. "You're, straight from work?" "Yeah, I didn't get home in time to change," I said casually. "I didn't want to be late for the big night." Hazel stood petrified, her nostrils flaring slightly, a sure sign of barely contained rage. But she quickly pulled herself together and turned to her guest with a professional smile. "May I introduce Noah's father, Ermel Pixton?" she said in a strained voice. "Ermel, this is Mr. and Mrs. Dorset, my new clients, and Mr. Kingsley, the director of our agency." I shook hands with the guest, noticing that Mr. Kingsley cringed slightly at the touch of my calloused palm. "It's a pleasure," I said sincerely. "I've heard good things about your company, Mr. Kingsley. And to you, Mr. and Mrs. Dorset, congratulations on your new home. Hazel mentioned it was a mansion in the hills?" "Yes, overlooking the bay," replied Mr. Dorset, a stout man of about 60 with bushy gray eyebrows. "We put almost all our savings into it, but it's worth it. The Golden Mile, you know." "Oh yes, it's a lovely neighborhood," I nodded. "I know a few people who live nearby." Hazel gave me an incredulous look. We all sat down at the table, and I was between Mrs. Dorset and Mr. Kingsley, across from Hazel and Noah. Hazel immediately took the lead in the conversation, talking about the complexities of the deal and how she had managed to overcome all the obstacles. "My husband and I didn't expect it to go so quickly," Mrs. Dorset, a woman about my age with an elegant gray in her dark hair, admitted. "But Hazel is a real professional." "She's really very determined," I agreed. "Always knows what she wants." Hazel glanced at me warily, trying to see if there was some implication in what I was saying. The waiter came over to take the drink order. Everyone chose wine from the expensive list, but I stayed true to my scotch. When the menu arrived, I noticed that the prices were listed without dollar signs, an old trick of expensive restaurants. I guess you've had a hard day at work? Mr. Kingsley asked suddenly, nodding at my overalls. Just a normal day, I replied calmly. Santa Ana's parks need constant attention, especially in the fall when there are so many leaves. Parks? He asked with a little confusion. My father is a landscaper. Landscaping, Noah quickly interjected. In the city parks. I smiled, noticing Hazel fidgeting nervously with her napkin. To be blunt, I'm a janitor, I said. I keep Maynard Park on the north side of town clean. There was an awkward pause. Mrs. Dorset smiled politely. Mr. Dorset looked a little puzzled, and Mr. Kingsley clearly didn't know how to respond. It's uh, a very worthy endeavor, he finally said with an obvious effort. Public spaces are very important to a city. Really, I was genuinely surprised. Your employee seems to have a different opinion. Hazel's face turned white. Noah threw a warning glance at me. I'm sure Hazel appreciates all professions, Mr. Kingsley said diplomatically. Oh, she certainly does, I agreed. It's just that she prefers to keep some of them out of her important contacts. The waiter who appeared with a bottle of wine saved us from delving further into this awkward subject. While he was pouring drinks, Hazel quickly turned the conversation to the real estate market, and for the next 15 minutes we listened to the rising prices of downtown apartments and a new high-rise complex on the coast. When the hors d'oeuvres arrived, Mrs. Dorset suddenly turned to me. How long have you worked at the park, Mr. Pixton? About 3 years, I answered. After my wife died, I needed something to keep me busy. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss, she said sincerely. It must be hard to lose a life partner. Yes, I nodded, but the work helps, and I never get bored in the park. I meet new people every day. That's after he sold his business, Noah interjected, clearly trying to make me look better. Dash Dad owned a chain of car washes. Really? Mr. Dorset was interested. How big a chain? I mean, how big was it? 12 locations all over Santa Ana, I said. It was a pretty lucrative business. And you sold it to work as a janitor? To work as a janitor? Mr. Kingsley couldn't hide his bewilderment. I shrugged. I'd always wanted to work outdoors. Besides, money isn't the most important thing in life. But it gives you opportunity, Hazel said with a strained smile, especially in retirement. Travel, comfort. Maybe, I agreed. But for me, it's more important the simple pleasures, seeing the sun rise over the park, talking to the locals, feeling like you're doing something useful. Mrs. Dorset nodded approvingly. There's something in that. George and I are thinking about a quieter life, too. After decades in the corporate world, we want something real. Hazel looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Noah twirled his fork nervously in his hands. But still, Mr. Kingsley continued, with your business management experience, you might find a more appropriate position. You mean more prestigious, I said, looking him in the eye. You know, at my age, you stop worrying about what other people think. It was a direct attack on Hazel, and she realized it. Her eyes narrowed and her fingers gripped the wine glass tighter. Prestige is not an empty word in the business world, she said with feigned ease. Our clients pay attention to things like that. Like the fact that your father-in-law sweeps the paths in the park? I asked with a smile. The atmosphere at the table thickened. Mrs. Dorset awkwardly adjusted her earrings, and her husband suddenly took a keen interest in the pattern on the tablecloth. I didn't mean that, Hazel sneered. I think you did, I said calmly. But don't worry, I'm used to it. Not everyone can realize that happiness isn't always about career and status. The waiter brought the main courses, and the conversation quieted down for a while. I ordered a steak, and it was excellent. Mr. Dorset began to talk about his plans for the new house, and the tension eased a little. After a while, Mr. Kingsley turned to me. Say, Ermel, what do you do with your spare time? A janitor, I suppose, doesn't have a very busy schedule. I usually finish by 3 o'clock, I answered. Then I garden, read. Sometimes I go out of town on weekends. Fishing? Mr. Dorset asked. Sometimes, but more often I just relax at my country house by the lake. It's a beautiful view. I saw Noah blink in surprise. He didn't know about my second home, a small but comfortable villa, an hour's drive from the city that I'd acquired after I sold the business. By the lake, he asked me again. You never said, you never asked, son, I said softly. Besides, Hazel's always so busy with her career that it's unlikely you'd have time to visit. Hazel blushed slightly but remained silent. Mrs. Dorset, sensing the tension, tried to change the subject. And your son teaches mathematics, doesn't he? It's so interesting. My nephew has an aptitude for the exact sciences. Noah was visibly relieved, and for the next 15 minutes, we talked about education, today's students, and the grading system. Then the conversation moved smoothly to recent city developments. Have you heard about the new waterfront redevelopment project? Mr. Kingsley asked. The city has finally allocated a budget. Yes, that's good news, I nodded. It's been a long time coming. Let's hope the contractors don't steal everything like they did last time, Mr. Dorset said with a snort. I don't think anything will change with the current mayor, though. Do you know the mayor, Mr. Pixton? Mrs. Dorset asked. Fred Thompson? Yes, we meet sometime, I answered carelessly. He often walks in the mornings in my park with his dog. In your park? Hazel asked mockingly. You talk as if you owned it. It's just habit, I shrugged. When you take care of a place for 3 years, you start to think of it as your own. It's funny coming from the man who sweeps the paths there, Hazel said with an obvious sneer in her voice. It must be a source of pride for a janitor, though. There was an awkward pause. I noticed Noah tense up, and Mr. and Mrs. Dorset exchanged quick glances. Mr. Kingsley took a large sip of wine. Every job is important, Mrs. Dorset said diplomatically. Of course, Hazel agreed with a fake smile. I just think that Ermel might find an occupation more suited to his experience. You know, Hazel, I said calmly, someday you'll realize that real respect is earned by a man, not by his position or bank account. That's coming from a man who traded a successful business for a broom, she retorted. The wine had clearly loosened her tongue. Not a good role model. Hazel, Noah snapped at her. Why? Dashes she turned to her husband. I'm just telling the truth. Your father could have had a very different life. Instead, he chose this, she nodded at my jumpsuit. And he's making a fool of us in front of everyone. Please, let's not, Mr. Kingsley began. No, let him go on. I stopped him. I've long wanted to hear what Hazel really thinks. She hesitated for a second, but then, spurred on by the wine and a long-standing irritation, she continued. I think it's ridiculous for a man of your stature, with your abilities, to volunteer to be a janitor. You could have helped Noah with his career. You could have given us the means for a more decent place to live. She paused, clearly saying more than she meant to. So that's what this is about, I said slowly. It's not my job that bothers you. It's that I'm not sharing my money with you. It's not, she stammered. I'm just saying that your behavior seems selfish. You only think about your whims without considering how it affects us. On your image, you mean? Yes, she exclaimed, finally losing her temper. Yes, on our image. How am I supposed to explain to my clients that my father-in-law, who could live comfortably on dividends, prefers to dig in garbage cans? Hazel, stop, Noah said quietly but firmly. You're out of line. But it was like she didn't hear. You know what the funny thing is? You don't even realize how ridiculous it looks. Coming to a restaurant like this, in your work clothes, trying to make small talk. It's like, She was searching for the right comparison. It's like putting on a ball gown in a pigsty. Hazel, Noah raised his voice. Enough! There was a dead silence at the table. Mr. and Mrs. Dorset were obviously feeling extremely uncomfortable. Mr. Kingsley was studying the ceiling with as much interest as if all the secrets of the universe were written there. I slowly set aside my fork and napkin, looking directly at Hazel. Her face was red with excitement, her eyes glittering with a feverish gleam. You know, Hazel, I said calmly, I thought you despised me because of what I do, but now I realize that you despise the work itself, and that's much worse. I got up from the table. Noah started to get up too. Dad, please. It's okay, Noah. I held up my hand. I just don't think I belong here. Yeah, you better leave, Hazel said with visible relief. Morsar, this was clearly not your night. No argument here, I nodded. The waiter came up with a questioning look on his face. Is everything all right, sir? Quite all right, I replied. Just bring the bill for dinner, please. Of course, sir. The waiter left and returned shortly with a leather folder. I glanced at the amount, almost $500, including the wine and appetizers I'd ordered. Not a small sum, but not unreasonable for a place like this. I could have easily paid it, but instead I smiled and handed the folder to Hazel. Here, I think you might want to pay for it yourself, I said. After all, I'm just a poor, simple janitor. Her eyes widened with disbelief and indignation. What? But it's your holiday, Hazel, I continued with a smile. And, as you've just made clear, I'm completely out of place here, so I won't bother you anymore. I turned to the other guests. It was a pleasure to meet you. Mr. and Mrs. Dorset, enjoy your new home. Mr. Kingsley, you have an excellent employee, perhaps a little arrogant, but certainly ambitious. Dad, wait. Noah looked confused and upset. Let's talk. Not today, son. I put my hand on his shoulder. Call me tomorrow if you want to. With these words, I turned around and headed for the exit, feeling the stares of the other customers. The maitre d', seeing me leaving, hurriedly opened the door. I hope you had a good time, sir, he asked with professional courtesy. Quite enlightening, I replied, stepping out into the cool evening air. In the parking lot, I handed my receipt to the clerk, who quickly went to get my car. A minute later, I heard the familiar rumble of a powerful engine, and a black Porsche Cayenne pulled up right in front of the restaurant entrance. I was just opening the door when I heard a surprised gasp behind me. When I turned around, I saw Hazel running out of the restaurant. She was standing on the steps, her mouth hanging open in surprise, her face pale. Behind her loomed a puzzled Noah and the curious faces of the other guests. Is that your car? She finally squeezed it out. I smiled, climbing into the driver's seat. One of the perks of being a poor janitor is that it doesn't occur to anyone that you might have a Porsche, I replied. Dash by, Hazel. Say hello to Fred Thompson the next time you sell a house in his neighborhood. Her face stretched even more at the mention of the mayor. I closed the door and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see Noah saying something excitedly to Hazel, waving his arms. Her face was changing from shock to realization, and then to something that could only be described as horror. She realized that all this time she'd despised not just a janitor, but a man who was probably richer than most of her customers. A man who could have helped her climb the career ladder, open doors to the highest circles of society. And now those doors were slamming shut right in her face. I stepped on the gas and drove smoothly out of the parking lot, leaving behind the restaurant, a shocked Hazel and a confused Noah. I felt a strange mixture of contentment and sadness in my chest. I didn't want to hurt my son, but maybe this was a lesson we both needed. The empty night road stretched ahead. I put on some music, something classical, Mozart, I think, and steered the car toward the lake house. I needed space to think, and it was always a good place to think. Besides, I was sure Noah would want to have a serious talk very soon, and this time I wasn't going to hide anything. The drive to the lake took a little over an hour. The highway was deserted at night, with only the occasional lone car. I turned on the heated seats. The October night was unexpectedly cold. Mozart's music filled the cabin, a strange contrast to the work overalls and driving gloves I'd worn when I'd left the restaurant. As I turned onto the narrow road leading to the lake, my phone rang. Noah's name popped up on the screen. I sighed and put the call on speaker. Yes, Noah, I answered, keeping my eyes on the road. Dad, are you crazy? His voice shook with excitement. What was that? A little lesson, I answered calmly. It's about time we set the record straight. Do you realize what you've done? His voice sounded desperate. Hazel is hysterical. Her boss is in shock. The Dorsets think we're some kind of crazy family. And what shocked them so much, I asked? That a janitor can own a Porsche. Or that your wife publicly humiliated her father-in-law. You set Hazel up on purpose. There was anger in his voice now. Asham, you knew how important this evening was to her. Did she know how important respect was to me? I parried. 3 years, Noah. 3 years I put up with her dismissive attitude. There was silence on the line. I turned at the Lake Carmel sign and started down the winding road toward my house. Ahead I could already see the smooth water reflecting the moonlight. Where are you now? Noah finally asked in a calmer tone. I'm on my way to the lake house. What lake? His voice was perplexed again. Dash, dash, Dad. Seriously, what's going on? First a Porsche, now some lake house. Are you leading a double life? I couldn't help but laugh. You could say that, although it would be more accurate to say that I've been keeping some of the details under wraps. Why? He wondered. Why did you hide from me that you had a house and a car and what else don't I know? I sighed as I parked in the driveway of my house, a one-story modern-style structure with large windows overlooking the lake. Let's talk about this later, okay? I just got here and I want to rest. Tomorrow I'll be back in town and we can talk. No, Noah said suddenly firmly. I want to know now. Give me the address and I'll come over. At 1 o'clock in the morning? I looked at my watch, surprised. Even at 3 o'clock? I need to understand what's going on. I paused, weighing my options. Maybe it would be better to talk right away, before the situation got more confusing. Okay, I finally agreed. Dash Lake Carmel, Pine Street 23, but come alone. Hazel still refuses to go with me, he said bitterly. She said she'd had enough of your antics for one day. All the better, I said. I'll see you later. I ended the call and got out of the car. The night air was filled with the smell of pine trees and the freshness of water. Turning on the outside lights with the remote, I walked down the stone path to the front door. The house inside was warm and cozy. The smart home system automatically turned on the heat as I approached the building. I took off my work overalls, leaving me in a shirt and jeans, and made my way to the kitchen. There I poured myself a glass of whiskey, not Glenfiddich this time, but a Macallan 25-year-old, a drink Elizabeth called liquid gold for special occasions. Today was definitely such an occasion. With whiskey in hand, I stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the lake. The night was clear, the stars reflected in the dark water, creating the illusion of infinite space. I sat down in a chair and let my thoughts flow freely. What had I done? Ruined my relationship with my son for the fleeting satisfaction of the shock on Hazel's face? Or had I finally done what I should have done long ago, revealed the true nature of our relationship? In my shirt pocket, I fumbled for the picture of Elizabeth I always carried with me. In the moonlight, her smile seemed especially soft, understanding. You would have been wiser, wouldn't you? I whispered, looking at the picture. You would have found a way to get through to her without making a scene. But Elizabeth was gone, and I had to do things my own way. Maybe not in the most delicate way, but honestly. I finished my whiskey and went back inside to change into my clothes. Noah wouldn't be here for another hour and a half, even if he drove fast. I had time to get my thoughts in order. Settling into the living room with a new shot of whiskey, I turned on the fireplace, an electric one, but with a very realistic flame effect. Elizabeth had wanted a real one, but I'd insisted on a more eco-friendly option. I bought this house 3 months after selling the business, a place to get away from the noise of the city and be alone with my memories. I didn't plan on keeping it from Noah. It just wasn't the right time to tell him. And then Hazel showed up, and I instinctively began to shut myself away, shielding my little private world from her assessing gaze. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't Noah, but Phil, my financial advisor and probably my only close friend. How did your experiment go? He asked instead of greeting me. Stormy, I answered. Hazel almost choked when she saw me driving the Porsche. Phil laughed. I can imagine. And your son? He's on his way here. He wants an explanation. Will you finally tell him about your finances? I hesitated. I think it's time. He needs to know that his wife pushed her father away for a reason, a purpose. Go easy on him, Phil advised. The boy's going through enough already. I know, I sighed, but better the bitter truth than the sweet lie. That's what Elizabeth used to say. Sure, she was a wise woman, Phil said. By the way, about those documents for the charity fund. Let's discuss it tomorrow, I interrupted him. There's already too much going on today. Whatever you say. Good luck with your son. After talking to Phil, I went to the bookcase and pulled out a thick folder labeled Finance. Inside were account statements, investment reports, real estate documents, all the things I'd been hiding from Noah and Hazel for the past few years. It wasn't that I'd purposely hidden it, I just never discussed it. And they never asked. Or rather, Hazel asked, but in hints that I ignored. The sale of the car wash chain brought me $8 million plus a 5% share of future profits. With smart investments and additional revenues, my fortune now totaled just over $12 million. Not an astronomical sum by the standards of really rich people, but quite enough to live comfortably and help my loved ones. And yet I chose to work as a janitor. Not because of the money, of course. The $20 an hour wage was a drop in the ocean compared to my investment income. I did it for the structure of the day, physical activity, and most importantly, socializing with regular people. In a world where you were judged by your bank account, the park was one of the few places where all that mattered was your actions and how you treated others. Elizabeth understood that. She always saw more in people than their social status or professional accomplishments. I wonder if I could love Hazel if I gave her a chance, or would her materialism and snobbery still push me away? The sound of a car pulling up interrupted my musings. Judging by the time, about 2 in the morning, Noah was driving fast. I went to the window and saw his old Honda Accord parked next to my Porsche. The contrast was stark. Noah looked tired and strung out. His usually neatly coiffed hair was disheveled, his tie was off to the side, and there was confusion in his eyes. He rang the doorbell, though he could have just knocked. "Hi, son," I said, opening the door. "Come on in." He came in, looking around with undisguised surprise. "This is your house?" he asked, looking at the modern interior, the designer furniture, and the panoramic windows overlooking the lake. "3 years now," I nodded. "I bought it shortly after I sold the business. And you never once mentioned it," he sounded reproachful. "And you've never once asked me how I used the money," I countered. "Would you like something to drink? I've got whiskey, wine, tea." "Whiskey," he said firmly, tossing his jacket on the nearest chair. "The strongest I've got." I poured him a Macallan and pointed to the couch in front of the fireplace. We sat staring at the electric fire, sipping whiskey from crystal glasses. "I don't understand," Noah said at last. "What's all this show for? Why pretend to be a poor janitor when you've got all this?" He put his hand around the room. "I've never pretended to be poor," I countered. "I do work as a janitor, and I like it. Just because I have money doesn't change anything." "But you've been hiding it," he exclaimed. "You let Hazel think that." "What?" I interrupted. "That your father was a common laborer, unworthy of her society? Is that a reason to treat me with contempt?" Noah opened his mouth, but closed it immediately, unable to find a suitable answer. "If I'd shown her the house and the Porsche and the bank statements from the beginning, she would have treated me differently," I continued, "and it would have been even more fake." I took a sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my body. "You see, son, I wanted to be respected for who I was, not what I had." "But you knew how important her career was to Hazel, her connections." Noah was still trying to defend his wife. "She just wanted to fit into certain circles." "And my janitor image was getting in the way?" No. I don't know." He ran his fingers through his hair. "It's all so complicated." "Actually, it's very simple," I said softly. "A real relationship is built on accepting the whole person, not just the parts we're comfortable with." Noah was silent, staring into his glass. I decided to give him time to think and went to the window. The moon was reflecting in the lake, creating a silvery path on the dark water. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he finally asked. "About the house? About the money?" I turned to him. "Would you have listened? For the last 3 years, you've been so caught up in Hazel and her ambitions that you barely find time for our traditional Sunday lunch once a month." "That's not fair," he objected. "I've always defended her," I finished for him. "Even when she openly expressed contempt for my work. Even when she threw my Christmas present in the trash, thinking I couldn't see." His eyes widened. "What? What gift?" "The scarf. A regular wool scarf I bought for her last Christmas. She threw it away without even taking off the wrapping paper." Noah looked shocked. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," I nodded. "You only see what she lets you see." I walked over to the bookcase and pulled out the financial folder. "Here," I placed it on the coffee table in front of Noah. "It's all about my finances, investments, real estate. Nothing fancy, but enough to live comfortably. And yes, I could help you with a down payment on a house in a more upscale neighborhood, or starting your own business for Hazel if she really wanted it. Noah opened the folder carefully, looking through the documents. His eyebrows rose higher and higher. 12 million, he whispered. But why? Why am I sweeping park paths for $20 an hour? I smiled. Because money is a tool, not a goal. Your mom taught me that. She always said, success isn't measured by how much money you have, but by how you use it and whether it's necessary for your happiness. Noah closed the folder and leaned back on the back of the couch, looking completely lost. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I sat down next to him. Just think about what's really important to you and who Hazel really is. You're being unfair to her, he objected weakly. She's just ambitious. Ambition is fine, I agreed, as long as it's not built on humiliating other people. Tell me honestly, Noah, has she ever asked me if I'm happy with my life? Interested in my hobbies? Tried to get to know me as a person, not as a social function? He was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I don't need you to choose between us, I continued. I just want you to see the situation for what it is. Hazel is manipulating you, using your love and loyalty to mold your life into her own. And you're letting her do it. She's my wife, Noah said quietly. And you're my son, I replied just as quietly. And I can't stand to see you lose yourself. We stopped talking. Dawn was breaking outside the window, a pale pink glow appearing over the edge of the forest on the opposite side of the lake. A new day. What am I going to do? Noah finally asked. And in that moment, he seemed as confused as when he'd broken his first model airplane as a child. For starters, sleep here, I suggested. The guest bedroom has everything you need. We'll talk again in the morning. Fresh in the head. He nodded, finishing his whiskey. What about Hazel? She's waiting for me to come back. Call her, I said. Tell her you're staying here. It'll be the first step towards starting to make your own decisions. Noah pulled out his phone and saw 5 missed calls from his wife. Shit, he muttered, dialing her number. The conversation was short and tense. I stepped out onto the terrace to give him privacy, but I could still hear Hazel's raised tone even through the closed door. When Noah finished talking, his face was pale. She's furious, he said, coming out to me on the terrace. Says I chose you over her. What did you choose for yourself? I asked. Noah was silent for a long time, staring out at the lake. I don't know, he finally admitted, but I want to find out, really figure it out. I put my hand on his shoulder. That's good. The first step to any decision is being honest with yourself. We stood side by side, watching the sun slowly rise over the horizon, painting the lake in golden hues. For the first time in a long time, I felt a real closeness with my son. Perhaps my little experiment at the restaurant was worth it. By the time we got back to the house, Noah looked calmer, though still pensive. Dad, he said, stopping in front of the guest bedroom door, I still don't understand why you didn't tell me sooner. About the money, about this house. I would never used it. I finished it for him. I know, but you would have told Hazel, and she... I didn't finish. Noah nodded, realizing what I hadn't said. Get some rest, I said. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do next. In the morning at breakfast, we continued our conversation. Noah, sleepy and a little calmer, asked more specific questions. He wanted to know how many other secrets I was keeping from him. There are no other secrets, I assured him, pouring coffee. Just the usual financial stuff you don't talk about at dinner. I was never going to make it a secret. And the charitable foundation? He asked, pointing to the papers I'd left on the table. Is that something new? A project Phil and I have been working on for the past few months, I explained. A fund to help low-income families with their children's education. Scholarships, grants, career guidance. Noah studied the documents with genuine interest. It's impressive. You're putting $2 million into it? To start, yes, I nodded. Then we'll bring in other donors. And all this time you could be living a very different life, he said thoughtfully. Traveling, buying whatever you want. What would I want? I smiled. I have a roof over my head, food, good books, and a job that gives me physical activity and socialization. What more could I want? Noah shook his head, but with understanding, not judgment. You're an amazing person, Dad. I wish I'd noticed that before. It's not too late to start noticing, I said. And not just me, but yourself, the person you really want to be. After breakfast, we went for a walk along the lake. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect for a leisurely walk and a serious conversation. I have to tell Hazel the truth, Noah said when we reached the small pier. About your finances, about the house. That's your decision, I said. But think about how she's going to take that information. And most importantly, why do you want her to change her attitude toward me? Or why do you want her to see her true reaction? Noah thought for a moment, staring at the surface of the lake. Probably both, he admitted. I want to give her a chance, but I also want to see what's more important to her, status and money or, yeah. That's honest, I nodded, and brave. We stood on the pier, enjoying the silence and the beauty of nature. Ducks swam in the distance, occasionally diving for food. The peaceful picture contrasted with the storm of emotions that raged in our hearts. I've made a decision, I said suddenly. You must find out who Hazel really is. Not from my words, but from her actions. What do you mean? Noah was wary. I'll tell you the plan, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something really right for my son, a plan to help you see the truth. Noah and I drove back to town in the afternoon. All the way we talked about simple things. The fishing I'd been into lately, his research in applied math, movies worth seeing. It was as if we were avoiding the main topic, giving ourselves a break before the inevitable continuation of a difficult conversation. I drove first in my Porsche, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at the old Honda Noah. How strangely life works out sometimes. My son, who had a millionaire father, drove a car that was over 15 years old and lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. All because I chose not to tell him my true financial situation. Was that a mistake? I pondered that all the way back. It could have been. But I wanted Noah to build his own life, not rely on my money. I wanted him to value what he earned on his own, not what he got from his father. Elizabeth had always said that the biggest mistake parents make is depriving their children of the ability to overcome their own challenges. I pulled into the driveway of my townhouse and stopped in front of the garage. Noah parked in the back. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the bright fall sun casting a golden light on the yard, making the yellowed maple leaves glow like coins. I never realized there was a Porsche hiding in this garage, Noah said as we got out of the cars. How many more secrets does this house hold? So come on in and find out, I said as I opened the front door. Inside, the house looked exactly the same as it always did. Cozy, a little old-fashioned, with pictures on the walls and a shabby rug in the living room. The house Noah had grown up in and seemed to know like the back of his hand. Where should we start the tour? I asked with a touch of irony. Noah looked around as if he were seeing these rooms for the first time. Maybe with you finally telling me the truth, he suggested, and show me those mysterious treasures you've been hiding all these years. I nodded and pointed to the kitchen. Let's make some coffee first. It's going to be a long conversation. We settled down at the kitchen table with cups of strong coffee. I pulled a box of cookies from the cabinet that Noah had loved as a kid, plain oatmeal with raisins. He looked at me in surprise. Do you still buy those? Every week, I admitted. Habit. He took a cookie and nibbled thoughtfully. Where do I start? I rubbed my chin. Probably from the beginning, from the moment I sold the business. I told Noah about how I'd gotten an offer from a big company that was expanding throughout California. $8 million plus 5% of future revenues an offer that was hard to refuse, especially after Elizabeth's death. Without her, the business was no longer the same joy, and I decided it was time for a change. But why didn't you tell me the amount? Noah asked. I mean, I knew you sold the business profitably, but I didn't realize the scale. You were just starting to date Hazel, I reminded him. I was completely absorbed in this new relationship. And then I didn't want my money to have any impact on your life, on your decisions. So you didn't trust me? There was resentment in his voice. No, I shook my head. I didn't trust her, and, as time had shown, for good reason. Noah lowered his eyes, not disagreeing. Last night's episode at the restaurant was still too fresh in his memory to argue. After the sale, I continued. I consulted with financial advisors, including Phil. We developed an investment strategy, quite conservative but reliable. I invested some of the money in real estate, a house by the lake, a small office center on the western edge of the city, a couple of apartments in San Diego, which I rent out. Wait, Noah interrupted. You have an office center? A small one, I clarified. 3 floors, about 30 tenants. It brings in a steady income. Noah shook his head, still digesting the information. And all this time you've been working as a janitor. Because I like it, I said firmly. You see, money gives you freedom of choice. And I chose what makes me happy. Physical work in the fresh air, socializing with people, and not having the stress and responsibility that I had when I ran the business. What about ambition? Goals? Asked Noah. Hazel always says that without them, life is meaningless. I smiled. I have goals, son. They're just different from your wife's. I want to live my remaining years in harmony with myself, helping people and enjoying simple pleasures. Isn't that a worthy goal? Noah thought for a moment, stirring his coffee with a spoon. You know, when I was a kid, you used to say that success wasn't measured in money, but in happiness. I seem to have forgotten that. We all forget important things sometimes, I nodded, especially when there's someone around to remind us of material values. Noah wrinkled his nose, but he didn't defend Hazel. Instead, he asked, and the charitable foundation? Tell me more about it. I got up and took out from the living room a folder with documents, which we began to look through back at the lake house. The idea for the foundation was born about a year ago. I wanted to create something useful that could continue after me. The foundation was to provide scholarships to talented children from low-income families, help with tuition, and give grants for educational projects. I'm putting $2 million into it to start, I explained. And I'm creating an endowment, the interest from which will continually support the foundation's activities. Phil is helping with the legal side of things. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Noah asked. I could have helped, been involved. I was going to tell you when it was ready, I admitted. I was going to ask you to be one of the board members. You're a mathematician, you're good with numbers, and more importantly, you have a good heart. Noah looked touched. Thanks, Dad. I'd love to. We moved to the living room, where I opened a safe hidden behind a seascape painting. Inside were real estate deeds, stocks, bonds, insurance policies, the whole paper part of my fortune. It's all here, I said, handing Noah a stack of papers. You can look through it if you're interested. There are no more secrets. He skimmed through the papers, pausing at the numbers, which must have seemed astronomical compared to his teaching salary. And all this time, he shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. All these years, I've been living the life I wanted to live, I said. And I hope you'll understand why I didn't brag about it. But why did you keep it from me? He asked again, and there was no accusation in his voice, only genuine incomprehension. I would never have asked you for money. I know, I said softly. But you'd know you had it. And that knowledge, it changes people, Noah. Even the ones closest to you. I've seen it so many times. How rich parents unwittingly spoil their children by disincentivizing them from independence. Noah was silent for a long time, digesting what he'd heard. Did Mom know that you were going to sell the business? We discussed it just before she got sick, I nodded. She was supportive of the idea. She said it was time for us to think about how to spend our remaining years, traveling, doing the things we love. My voice trembled. Even after 5 years, memories of Elizabeth and unfulfilled plans were painful. Noah came over and sat next to me on the couch. I'm sorry, Dad, he said quietly. I should have been more interested in your life. Asking, spending more time together. You were building your life, I objected. That's okay, it's a shame Hazel wasn't the right person to make you really happy. Noah didn't answer, just stared thoughtfully at the picture of his mother on the mantel. What do you think Mom would say about all this? He finally asked. I smiled, imagining Elizabeth's reaction to the scene at the restaurant last night. She would have first scolded me for being disrespectful for so long, and then for making a public scene, I said. And then she'd invite Hazel over for a serious talk. Your mom had an amazing gift for finding her way to the heart of even the most difficult people. Our conversation was interrupted by the sharp ringing of Noah's cell phone. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and tensed. "Hazel," he said, showing me the screen. I nodded, letting him know I didn't mind if he answered. "Hi," Noah began cautiously, answering the phone. "Yeah, I'm at my dad's." Of course I remember about the bill. What about it? His face gradually changed from neutral to surprised, then to indignant. "Wait, you mean the restaurant refuses to accept your credit card?" He threw me a puzzled look. "What are you suggesting?" I watched my son's expression grow more and more tense. "Hazel, you know we're tight on money right now. We just recently paid off the last installment of the renovation. What do you mean, borrow from your father?" He was looking directly at me now, and his eyes were filled with confusion and anger, but not at me, it seemed. "No, I'm not going to ask him for money," he said firmly. "It was your party. You invited the guests. You deal with it. Yes, I realize it's important for your reputation." He stood up and paced the room, ruffling his hair with his free hand, a gesture he had adopted from me and always did when he was nervous. "Hazel, I can't talk about this right now. My father and I are discussing important things." "No, I won't tell you what they are. Look, just call the bank or ask for an extension at the restaurant. At least borrow from a colleague. You said the Dorsets were happy with the deal." Even when I wasn't near the phone, I could hear Hazel's excited voice, though I couldn't make out the words. "I'll call you back later," Noah finally said, and ended the call without waiting for an answer. He turned to me with an expression of shock and disbelief. "She wants me to ask you for $500 to pay the bill at the restaurant," he exclaimed. "After everything that happened yesterday." I couldn't hold back a chuckle. "Persistence is admirable. It's not funny, Dad." Noah frowned. "She's hysterical. She says her credit card is maxed out because we just made a big purchase and went over the limit. And the bill has to be paid today, or the restaurant will tell her boss, Mr. Kingsley. So she decided the most logical thing to do was ask the man she'd humiliated yesterday for money." I shook my head. "Amazing logic." Noah sank heavily into his chair. "I don't understand what's going on with her. She's never been so unscrupulous before. Unscrupulous. Or maybe you just haven't noticed," I suggested gently. "When we're in love, we tend not to see our partner's flaws." He didn't answer, immersed in his own thoughts. I could see the complex internal struggle going on in his head. As a mathematician, he was used to analyzing facts, building logical chains, and now the facts were adding up to an unpleasant picture. "I always thought she was just ambitious," he finally said, "that she cared about her career, status. But now I see it's more than that." "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Money," Noah said bitterly. "It was always about money, about what you can get with connections, status, relationships." He turned to me, and I saw the pain of epiphany in his eyes. "You know what she said when she found out you were working as a janitor? 'What a shame. Your father could have used his connections in business to help us get ahead.' Not how he feels or why he chose that job, just about how it was affecting her, her career." The next few days were challenging. Noah stayed at my place, taking only the bare essentials from home, a laptop, a couple changes of clothes, and a toothbrush. Hazel called him hourly, but he answered only occasionally, briefly, and matter-of-factly. I could hear their conversations, or rather, Hazel's monologues, punctuated by occasional comments from her son. She went from anger to pleading, from accusations to apologies. Classic tactics of a manipulator backed into a corner. On Wednesday morning, 4 days after the incident at the restaurant, we were sitting at the breakfast table when Noah suddenly said, "Hazel wants to meet. Says she owes me an explanation for her behavior." I put aside the toast I was just spreading jam on and looked at my son. "What do you think?" "I don't know," he rubbed his temples. "Part of me wants to hear her explanation. The other part is afraid she'll just find a way to twist things around like she always does." "Has she tried to explain her behavior at the restaurant yet?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Oh yeah," Noah grinned bitterly. "She said she was under pressure, stressed about an important deal, drank too much wine. That she actually respected you and your choice of profession, just worried about the impression you'd make on her clients." What about Portia and my financial situation? She says she's shocked you kept it from us, that if she'd known sooner, she could have helped you with your real estate investments. Noah shook his head. Can you imagine? Even now, she's thinking about how she could have capitalized. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Typical reaction of someone who thinks only in terms of benefits. You do realize that this is classic manipulative behavior, don't you? I asked cautiously. First denial of guilt, then shifting responsibility, then going on the offensive. Noah sighed, looking out the window. The morning sun was golden in his hair, highlighting the early gray on his temples, an inheritance from me that he'd inherited much earlier. You know, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about our marriage these past few days. I've been going over memories, analyzing situations, and I've found that I can't remember a single time when Hazel was ever interested in my wishes unless they were the same as her own. He turned to me, and I saw the pain of realization in his eyes. Even the house we live in. I wanted a small cottage closer to the college where I teach. She insisted on a house in an upscale neighborhood that we could barely afford. A wedding we could barely afford instead of the modest ceremony I dreamed of. Furnishings that looked more like museum pieces than a place to live. You never talked about it, I remarked. Because every time I tried to express my opinion, she either ignored it or convinced me that I didn't understand anything about the good life. He grinned wryly, and I, like an idiot, believed she just had more refined taste. I listened in silence, giving him a chance to talk. Noah needed that more than advice. Yesterday I checked our credit history, he continued after a pause. You know what I found? A secret loan I didn't know about. $30,000, taken out 6 months ago. What did she spend that much money on, I wondered. Stocks, Noah answered. She'd invested in some startup on the recommendation of a colleague. Didn't say a word to me. And when I asked her about it on the phone yesterday, you know what she said? It was an investment in our future. I didn't want to bother you with the details. It's not like you know anything about business. He clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. $30,000, that's almost a year's salary for an assistant professor. And she called it details. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling his muscles tense. Noah, I can't and don't want to tell you what to do with your marriage. It's only your decision. But maybe you should talk to a specialist. A marriage counselor or a relationship counselor? Already made an appointment? He nodded. I called yesterday after I discovered the loan. The appointment is this afternoon. Do you want me to give you a ride? I offered. Or would you prefer to go alone? Alone, he answered. I need to sort myself out without anyone else's influence. Even yours, Dad. I nodded understandingly. Noah had always been an independent thinker, even as a child. Elizabeth said he had an inner compass that may go astray temporarily, but always returns to the truth. Now I could see that compass slowly but surely returning him to the right path. After breakfast, Noah left for college for his lectures, and I went to the park. Work had been an even greater comfort to me than usual these past few days. Methodically sweeping the paths, picking up fallen leaves, emptying the trash cans, all of it gave me a chance to think about the situation without having to dive headfirst into it. By noon, I had finished with the eastern sector of the park and sat down on a bench to eat a snack. Suddenly, a familiar figure stopped nearby. Hazel. She looked flawless as always. Elegant coat, perfect hair, makeup. Only her eyes, red and puffy, betrayed her condition. May I sit down? She asked, pointing to the seat next to me. I nodded silently, though I tensed inwardly. What did she want? To try to manipulate me into influencing Noah? Hazel sat on the edge of the bench, her back unnaturally straight, as if she'd swallowed a stick. I think you know why I'm here, she began. I guess I do, I replied, still chewing on my sandwich. But you better be straight with me. You turned Noah against me, she said without preamble. Use that ridiculous incident at the restaurant to ruin our marriage. I wiped my hands slowly with my napkin, giving myself time to think about my answer. That's an interesting interpretation, I finally said, but not in line with reality. I didn't turn Noah against you. He's a grown man, capable of drawing his own conclusions. Aaron, you set this up on purpose, her voice trembled. You came in your work clothes knowing how important that dinner was to me. And then that demonstration with the car. And you deliberately humiliated me in front of your clients and your boss, I parried calmly. You reap what you sow, Hazel. She was speechless for a moment, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. Yeah, I was wrong, she finally admitted. I was unprofessional and rude, and I'm ready to apologize. But you also played a role in the conflict. By hiding your financial situation, I clarified. Or that I did not want to fit into the image of a successful father-in-law, which you could use to advance your career. Hazel blushed. I'd clearly hit the mark. You're being unfair, she said. I truly love Noah, and if I wanted to use your connections, it was for our mutual benefit. Ours or yours? She didn't answer, only pressed her lips together. After a few seconds' silence, she spoke again, in a different, softer tone. Ermel, I understand that you're protecting your son. That's normal. But don't you want him to be happy? Isn't that why you've made all this spectacle? Of course I do, I nodded. That's why I'm glad he's finally seeing you for who you really are. And what do you think I am? I could hear a dangerous note in her voice. A person who evaluates other people solely in terms of their usefulness, I answered bluntly. A person who manipulates those closest to him to achieve his own ends, who is incapable of loving anyone more than themselves. Hazel stood up, clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I will not let my marriage be destroyed because of your revenge for a petty misunderstanding. It's not revenge, Hazel, I said calmly. It's just the truth that's finally come out. And Noah will decide about your marriage, not me. She turned and walked briskly out of the park, her head held high. I stared after her, feeling a strange mixture of regret and relief. Regret that my son had chosen an unsuitable life partner, and relief that he now realized it. That evening, when Noah and I had dinner, I told him about Hazel's visit. I wasn't surprised, he sighed. She tried to manipulate the counselor today, too. Talked about her difficult childhood, how her drive to succeed was her way of dealing with the traumas of her past. And how did the psychologist react, I asked. Very professional. Noah smiled slightly. He listened to her, asked a few leading questions, and then gently pointed out that past traumas explain behavior, but do not justify it, and that relationships were built on mutual respect, not on using each other. He was quiet for a moment, stirring the soup with a spoon. You know, after the session, Hazel was furious, said the psychologist was incompetent and that I'd chosen him on purpose to turn her against him. Classic reaction, I remarked. When a person isn't ready to admit his mistakes, he attacks those who point them out. Exactly, Noah nodded. And you know what the weird thing is? Before I would have agreed with her, I would have made excuses, made compromises. But today I just said that if she wasn't ready to work on herself in our relationship, then maybe we should break up. And how did she react? First with shock, then anger, then tears, he listed. Classic pattern. And then she said she'd regret giving up my inheritance. He looked up, and I saw a strange mixture of pain and determination in his eyes. You know, Dad, not about losing me, it's about losing access to your money, which she's sure will be mine someday. I nodded silently. Words were unnecessary. Noah had come to a realization that I could only bring him to. I'm filing for divorce, he said firmly. I'm seeing a lawyer tomorrow. I've already arranged it. Are you sure you're not in a hurry? I asked, though I inwardly approved of his decision. Absolutely, he nodded. In the last few days, I've seen so much manipulation, lies, self-interest. It was always there. I just didn't want to notice. Maybe I wasn't ready to admit that I'd made the wrong choice. He put the spoon down and looked me in the eye. Thanks, Dad, for opening my eyes. Although the method was, peculiar, I grinned, remembering the scene in the restaurant and Hazel's shocked face at the sight of Portia. Not the most delicate method, I'd admit, but sometimes it takes a shock to see what's right in front of your eyes. Suonum, Mom would be horrified by your methods, Noah smiled, but she'd agree with the result. Oh yes, I laughed. She would have first scolded me for the public scene and then quietly said, but it worked, didn't it? The following weeks were filled with legal advice, document gathering, in negotiations between lawyers. Hazel, realizing that she was losing not only her husband but also a potential inheritance, turned into a real fury. She demanded half of the entire estate, including the house she and Noah could barely afford, and even claimed a portion of his future inheritance. Fortunately, they had no children, and the marriage lasted only 2 years, making the divorce process much easier. Noah's lawyer, an experienced family law specialist, calmly parried all of Hazel's claims, reminding her of the prenuptial agreement she had signed and probably hadn't bothered to read carefully. One evening as we sat at my lake house where we had come for a weekend getaway from the hustle and bustle of the city and endless legal battles, Noah suddenly asked, "Dad, have you ever thought about getting married again?" The question caught me off guard. I stared thoughtfully at the fire in the fireplace, collecting my thoughts. "Sometimes," I admitted. But after all these years with your mom, it's hard to imagine anyone else around me." "But you're not old yet," Noah insisted. "You're only 67. You've got a lot of years ahead of you." I smiled, touched by his concern. "Maybe you're right, but I don't feel lonely. I have a job that brings me joy, friends. This house, you, and the memory of your mom, who is always with me." Noah nodded, accepting my answer. But then he added, "You know what Hazel told me the last time we saw each other? That I was as crazy as you are. That only a lunatic would give up a comfortable life for some ephemeral honesty with myself." "And what did you say?" I asked with interest. "That it's better to be an honest lunatic than a calculating liar," he smiled. "And that real comfort is when you can look in the mirror every morning without feeling ashamed of your actions." I raised my whiskey glass in a joking toast. "Here's to honest lunatics." "To honest lunatics," Noah repeated, touching my glass with his. 2 months after the incident in the restaurant, on a chilly December afternoon, I received an envelope with official documents. Noah, who by then had found a small apartment not far from the college but often dropped in on me, sat next to me as I opened it. "What's in there?" he asked, seeing my surprise. I silently held out the papers to him. It was the official notice of the finalization of the divorce proceedings between Noah Pixton and Hazel Brooks Pixton. The divorce had been finalized on the terms Noah's attorney had suggested. Division of the jointly acquired property in accordance with state law, with no additional financial claims on either side. "That's it," Noah said quietly after reviewing the papers. 2 years of marriage, and all that was left was a few sheets of stamped paper. "An experience," I added. "Invaluable experience that will help you not to make the same mistakes in the future." He smiled weakly and nodded. "Yes, I have plenty of that now." We sat in silence for a while, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Outside the window it was beginning to snow, a rare phenomenon for our climate. White flakes were slowly descending to the ground, covering the world with a pure white blanket. Symbolic, I thought. It was like nature was giving Noah a chance for a fresh start. "You know, Dad," he finally said, looking at the falling snow, "I've never thanked you for teaching me the most important thing." "And what is that?" I asked curiously. "To live by my own rules, not by other people's expectations," he answered. "To be true to yourself, even if the whole world thinks you are strange." I had forgotten that lesson for a while, but now I remembered it again. I felt a lump in my throat. In that moment, I saw him not only as my son, but as an extension of myself, as an extension of the values Elizabeth and I had worked so hard to instill in him. "This is the most valuable legacy I could leave you," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "Far more important than any money or possessions?" Noah nodded, and I saw a glint of tears in his eyes, not of grief, but of release. "What now?" he asked after a pause. "What are your plans?" "I'm going to continue working in the park," I answered. "I will start a charitable foundation. By the way, the documents are almost ready. Maybe I'll start writing that book I've always wanted to write. And I'll get promoted to associate professor next semester," Noah said, "and maybe start teaching an additional course in applied math for high school students. I've always wanted to work with kids." "Hazel thought it was a waste of time," I remembered. "Yes," Noah nodded, "said I could have made a lot more money in a private company with my smarts. But you know what? I like teaching. I like seeing students' eyes light up when they understand a complex concept. It's a happiness that no amount of money can buy." I smiled, recognizing in his words echoes of my own thoughts. Welcome to the club of weird people who value intangible happiness above material well-being. The best club ever, he agreed with a smile. We spent the whole evening talking about the future, his and mine. We made plans, shared ideas, dreamed, and at some point I caught myself thinking that the incident in the restaurant, intended as a small lesson to the arrogant daughter-in-law, had turned into a turning point in our lives. The moment when the masks were removed, the illusions shattered, and the truth finally came to the surface. Before I went to bed out of old habit, I picked up Elizabeth's picture. "We did it, darling," I whispered, looking at her smiling face. "Our son is back on the right track. I only wish you were there to see it." I thought her smile grew a little wider, and her eyes lit up warmer. Perhaps a play of light, or perhaps she really was somewhere nearby, watching us with her loving gaze. I woke up the next morning with a sense of lightness and peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The snow was still falling outside the window, turning the world into a fairyland. I got dressed and went out into the yard to shovel the driveway. Old janitorial habits don't go away. After a while, Noah joined me, taking a second shovel. "I couldn't leave you alone with a job like this," he said with a smile. We worked side by side, father and son, shoveling snow and planning for the future. Life went on, bringing new challenges and opportunities, and we were ready to face them together, staying true to ourselves and our values. And somewhere in the city, Hazel Brooks, now without the prefix Pixton, was probably still building her career, striving for material success and status. I had no hatred for her, only regret. Regret that she never realized a simple truth. Real happiness cannot be bought with money or status. It comes when you live in harmony with yourself, your values and principles. And even if the whole world thinks you're a weird millionaire janitor, it's your life and only you decide how to live it.